Topic for today and tomorrow um, is the single day in the Civil War, which would go down as the bloodiest day in American history. More Americans will die on this day than any other day in our history. That is largely mainly due to the Battle of Antietam. Um, Yet another disaster happened on September 17th, 1862, and that disaster happened right here in Pittsburgh. That was the Allegheny Arsenal explosion, and that is the worst civilian disaster of the Civil War, the single event that killed the most civilians, non-soldiers, um, as part of that war. Now, it is the bloodiest day in American history, September 17th, 1862. The Battle of Antietam was uh, bloody, deadly for both sides. Thousands on both sides lost. There was no clear victor. The Union could claim a victory because the South had retreated from the field, but uh, they lost more people than the South, and they didn't really have any tactical advantage. McClellan failed to pursue Lee when he retreated and destroy and rout his army. So the war continued for a few more years afterwards. This was early on in the war, still in 1862. There is photography from this battle and the aftermath, the bodies lying there. The images of this battle would strike and shock the American people. Seeing the carnage, seeing the warfare that is just total warfare, um, just people not holding back in their fighting. This brutal, savage fighting that was not seen before in all of history, well, at least all of American history, with these new weapons and technology. So, the photography that was seen there, the imagery created by the battle, and the legacy of the battle is one that impacts many people in this war. This illustration down here is the Allegheny Arsenal explosion. 3 explosions rocking the Allegheny Arsenal in present-day Lawrenceville, not very far from here. 15-minute drive for many of us. But we'll take a look at the basic facts of both of these events, and then today you'll be learning a little bit more about Antietam through the animated battle map video, and tomorrow we'll be doing some readings on the Arsenal explosion. So, some quick facts about the Battle of Antietam. Over 22,000 people are killed. Many more are wounded. In the Civil War, being wounded could mean amputations. It could mean death in the field hospitals. So it's not very the 22,000 is not very representative of the actual casualties of the battle. It was horrific in many ways for a lot of people. Again, there's no clear victor. The Confederates retreat, but there is no decisive defeat of them. They leave the battle because they recognize that their invasion of the North, which is part of their original plans, is not going to work. It's also not really an overall necessity for the Southern Army, so they don't lose too much besides all the thousands of people that die in this battle. And the Union only win because of good luck. They discover the Confederate battle plans and their troop movements and the positions wrapped in cigars, which were carelessly left behind by a Confederate general. The battle does, however, again stop the Southern momentum, and the long-term effects is that the European countries that may have considered supporting or recognizing the Southern states as their own country, they start to second guess that and think, okay, well, maybe it's not worth it because the North will eventually win this war. The biggest thing that kind of comes out of this, and we're going to be talking about this next week, is that Lincoln decides to draft the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves in the Southern states. And that will definitely make the European countries think twice, because at this point they are all free countries with no slavery, and they do not want to be seen as supporting a Southern or a slave country. So, watch the video to see more about Antietam. The Arsenal explosion. This is the Allegheny Arsenal in Pittsburgh, in present-day Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh, and it is again the largest civilian disaster of the Civil War. Allegheny Arsenal was responsible for manufacturing the ammunition cartridges for much of the Union Army, especially the Union Army in the West, who could easily transport from Pittsburgh down the Ohio, down the Mississippi to all the Union bases and forts and encampments in the West. Arsenal itself had been around since the War of 1812, and it had been supplying the military with ammunition since then. Now, by the time the Civil War started, there are a lot of men enlisting and fighting in the war. And much like you'll see in later wars, World War I, World War II especially, they begin to hire a lot of women. Now, they may have been hiring women before the war because the commanders at the Arsenal had left journals and letters saying that women were better workers than men for many reasons at their arsenal. So a lot of people will say that they were hiring women before the war even, but certainly with the war going on, more women found employment at the Arsenal. Again, unusual. This would be unusual in many parts of the country, but it was happening here in Pittsburgh. Now, the disaster itself, again, happened on the same day as Antietam, and no one's quite sure how it happened. Some people claim that it was a horseshoe sparking a line of gunpowder that led to the explosions. Some people say it was internal sabotage or a jealous ex-worker or a Southern conspiracy. There's no proof of any of that, but what we do know is that 3 explosions happened on September 17th, and after the rubble was cleared, took days for this to happen. 78 people were declared dead. Over 50 of them, their bodies were unidentified, and then people were buried in a mass grave. This is a photo of what the Arsenal used to look like before the explosion. Today, there's still parts of it left standing, just mainly for memorial purposes. In Allegheny Cemetery, again in Lawrenceville, there is a gravestone and a memorial for these people. They were buried in a mass grave. Most of the people who died were women and young girls in particular, in their teens, that were working at this factory, this weapons factory. So both of these events, Antietam and the Arsenal explosion, had a major impact across the country, especially here in Pittsburgh, because it is in Pittsburgh. This topic and this day was actually going to be much bigger in our original plan before the closure for learning about the Civil War, because it is the climax of the book Consecrated Dust, which we were going to read. So I do suggest that at some point in your life that you try to pick up this book and read it. It's a great book about the Civil War, the start of the Civil War, and all the way up through the Antietam and the Arsenal explosion. Set in Pittsburgh mainly, it is a great story with a good number of characters and their experience through the war. So if you ever do have a chance to read it, I do suggest that you do that. Unfortunately, we're not able to do it as a class, but it is definitely worth your time. So today, watch the video on Antietam, and then tomorrow there'll be some readings about the Arsenal explosion, and then we'll have a quick write for you to do based off of these two events on September 17th, 1862. All right, have a great day, everybody. Come to Office Hours if you have any questions.